How does a 100-year-old company known for keeping your home comfortable surprise the entire quantum computing industry? By providing the most powerful quantum computer in 2020, then making it 10 times more powerful within a year. We're talking with Honeywell Quantum Solutions in this episode of the Post-Quantum World. I'm your host, Konstantinos Karagiannis. I lead quantum computing services at Protiviti, where we're helping companies prepare for the benefits and threats of this exploding field. I hope you'll join each episode as we explore the technology and business impacts of the post-quantum era. So our guest today is the Chief Commercial Officer for Honeywell Quantum Solutions. And as you guys know, Honeywell's made quite a splash. So we're really happy to have him here on the Post-Quantum World. And welcome to Justin Ging.
Yeah, thank you, Konstantinos. Happy to be a part of this.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. I could still remember sitting in my office. We were still in offices at the time, and all of a sudden I hear, "Wait, Honeywell's doing a quantum computer? Like, what's going on?" It kind of blew my mind for a moment there, and then I looked into it and saw it was quite an interesting approach. So I don't know if you wanted to just let our listeners know a little brief history of how Honeywell went from being a well-known brand in just about everything to this hyper-focused industry.
Yeah, it's Honeywell is not necessarily a name you think of when you think of next-generation computing. There are those companies who are players in it where you just say, yeah, that's naturally their strategic imperative to go after. But Honeywell, people pause and they go, well, why is Honeywell in it? And a big part of it is that quantum computers are really different than classical computers. They're room-sized devices that look more like big physics contraptions, which in a sense they are. We're levitating individual ions and shining lasers on them to do quantum operations. And so it requires a lot of the things that Honeywell, over decades of experience, has a really strong background in. So we're thinking lasers and optics and cryogenics and vacuum systems and really complex control systems. All these things are Honeywell bread and butter. And our start actually was almost a decade ago, where there were some programs where people were looking at doing trapped ions for a number of reasons, and looked to Honeywell to help build the ion trap, which is kind of at the heart of the system, the device that does the holding and levitating of these ions. And so we got into some of that background and said, actually, there's more we could do. We could be trapping these ions ourselves, and we could put the other pieces to the system together. And so after several years of kind of proving it to ourselves, we reached a point about 5 years ago where a more concerted investment was made. So we stood up an organization where we have our headquarters in Broomfield, Colorado, just outside of Boulder, and another facility in Golden Valley, Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis, and really built a dedicated team to go after this market. And we were doing it in stealth for a while, so that's why people didn't hear. And the reason for that was kind of what you got at the beginning, which is Honeywell doesn't get necessarily the benefit of the doubt of doing advanced computing. And so we wanted to be ready to say, not here's what we're going to do, but here's what we've done already. And so we wanted to be able to have that ready. And so when I joined about 3 years ago, my mandate was to pull back the curtain and show off what we're doing. And so I imagine that's when you had your eye-opening experience in your office. And we stood up our website and reached out to ecosystem partners and built a customer pipeline. And last year, we launched 2 commercial systems, H0 and H1, which with our H1 system, we have set multiple records on pushing quantum volume, a measurement of the capability of the system. And we have a pipeline of customers using that, and engagements with enterprise customers, and really just moving it forward in the industry and getting the word out that, yes, we're here, we're doing it, and we're leading the way. And our play is really providing the very best, highest fidelity systems with the most capability, so that algorithm writers and people developing what quantum computers are going to do, developing these killer apps, give them the best tools that they can have so that they can push it forward, because in the industry, we're all dreaming of the day when we know exactly what killer apps quantum computers are good for, how they're going to provide value for customers, and really become a part of business processes. And we think that day is pretty close.
Yeah, and that was an awesome overview. And we're going to probably dive into just about everything you just said
right.
in this episode. And it was so funny because way to launch, right? You guys didn't come out and say, hey, we're going to have this quantum computer. Instead, it was something modest like, we're going to come out with the world's most powerful quantum computer, and in a year, we're going to increase it by an order of magnitude. So that was like, whoa, okay, just make a small claim, right? It's pretty exciting stuff. And so far, it looks like it's tracked pretty much right to the minute, too. But we'll get into all that with roadmap. So did you want to talk a little bit more about how trapped ion differs from, let's say, transmon? And the other types of qubits out there?
Yeah, so maybe I can just talk it in sense of what our qubit is. So we use a ytterbium ion, and we're using the spin of the electrons as the states of the 0 and 1. And so what that means for us is that we're starting from an atom, which is, because of nature, it's perfect. It is predictable, it's very well characterized, and it's known. And so all of our quantum operations are working within a realm of try not to mess up, try not to add error to it. And so any errors that we see, any lack of fidelity, any infidelities are really about the conditions in which that atom sits. And so, and noise from things that we apply to it. So we know where the noise comes from. We can characterize that, and we can make every effort to kind of reduce that. And that's what drives our approach to it, which is the trapped ion approach. And particularly within trapped ion, we're doing something different than others, which is we're actually moving the ions into their own separate area. So our current trap it's like a railroad track, so a linear trap where we can slide the ions around, and we'll take a pair of them and move them far away relatively on an atomic scale. It's very far away. From the others, and do the gate interactions with the lasers there. So that reduces the crosstalk with the other ions and has a very clean interaction. And then once they've had their gate interaction, they've been entangled or other things, they can be separated back out and intermingled with the other qubits. And that's the unique piece of what we're doing. And that's at the heart of it is called the quantum CCD architecture, which was originally envisioned by Nobel Prize winner Dave Wineland, and that was 20 years ago. And everyone said, "No, that's great. Seems really hard to do." So it was not tackled, and it is hard. And so that's the technical debt that we've been paying over the past several years, was to knock down the challenges and really get a hang of all the pieces that have to go into this. So the movement of ions, how do you keep them, keep control of them? How do you move them past each other in sort of a swap operation, not logical swap, but physically move the two ions around each other so that they can get out of each other's way, like two people going down an airplane aisle. All these pieces had to come together. And we actually had separate teams tackling each one of those problems. So there was a team focused on get just the highest fidelity gate that you can. Another team, how can you move them most efficiently? Another team, how can we have parallel zones so that we can do more than one operation at the same time? So all these pieces were done in parallel in the research side and then integrated into the system. So it was a hard concept. That was 20 years ago, but we've done it, and it's what makes ours unique and adds our capabilities.
Yeah, I remember when he and Serge Haroche won the Nobel Prize for that work. It was I think it was 2012, and I was talking about quantum, and I mentioned it in there, and people kind of their eyes lit up. It's like, whoa, if people are actually winning prizes in this field, maybe you're not crazy and quantum computing is coming. And I told people, yeah, it really is. And then, here we are, right? It took a little while. And do you see any limitations with that approach? Do you think that you'll still be able to use that same kind of separation system to keep having qubits ramp up and up and up and up as we need?
Yeah. And so, that's always been one of the critiques of trapped ion. People say, well, it doesn't scale. But I think that's based on kind of other older approaches to trapping ions. And we actually think we have a really good path to scale. And that is by providing the roads and streets that these ions can travel on. So the actual gate interaction happens separate, like I said, just kind of off in its quiet area. And really, it's about where do you put all the other qubits during this time? And then how do you get the qubits to meet up with each other? And so the scaling operation doesn't change that fundamental fidelity. So we keep our same high fidelity regardless of how many qubits we have. And then we have different trap designs, so essentially different roadways to be able to transport these ions around. So we will go from a linear to a racetrack type of operation where it's kind of two linear sections to then actually going to 2D, like more of a city street grid. And you can imagine it just like cars driving around a city. It's more efficient when you have different paths to go. And so we have a plan to scale up over the next decade through this approach. And it will be a challenge, but it's more of an engineering challenge rather than a scientific challenge. And so as we go forward over the next decade, we'll need to look at how do we shrink some of the systems. Like right now, we use bulk optics. So large lasers sitting on optics tables going through lenses and mirrors, prisms, and waveguides and things, or wave plates, I should say. And they all shine in through windows into a chamber that's about the size of a basketball, a stainless steel chamber that's been evacuated to less density than outer space and cooled down to 10 Kelvin with liquid helium and providing a really clean environment. So we're shining lasers in through those windows. And over time, it becomes such a large number of laser signals that it makes sense to try to shrink those down and deliver them more closely to the ions. And so anyway, the high-level takeaway is there is a path, and for at least the next decade, we think that technology that we've chosen is the right one to pursue in terms of the best way to push quantum capability forward.
Yeah, and we have to find a way to make that giant room size setup into something more like photo friendly that you can capture in like an iconic little image, right? You know? You and I joked about this once before. Like everyone thinks of the giant chandelier dilution, fridge that you have a transmon hanging at the bottom. It's like, what do you do with trapped ion? What do you? Yeah,
exactly. A lot of companies have their kind of big black boxes where all the science is inside. I used to joke with people, hey, we'll just have our big black box with lightning bolts on the side, like racing stripes. But yeah, there's a lot of different components to it. And, the heart of our system is that trap. So it's a nice gold bow tie shaped device where the exciting part is it's individual atoms that we're manipulating. Just it's kind of mind boggling, even the idea that you can see an individual atom, but not only see it, but actually operate in it, control it, know exactly where it is at all times, and manipulate them with other atoms.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to see, you guys have to check out the artwork by going to the Honeywell site because it's pretty cool to see that bow tie design. So how does your implementation differ from IonQ?
Yeah, so the IonQ approach is it comes down to how you're trapping, and that is, if you imagine it, you're taking an electric field, a changing electric field that essentially forms a bowl shape of electric potential, and it's that potential well that's keeping that ion trapped because it's essentially having to go uphill in any direction, and so it can't go anywhere. Its lowest energy is to sit at the bottom of this trap, this well. The IonQ approach is to have a large well where you put all the ions together in a chain in one large bowl. Our approach is to use small bowls. So the idea, my analogy is you've got either a bus full of kids or you're taking the kids off in separate cars to go have their conversation. And you can imagine that you're going to have a quieter conversation between two people in their own car than you are on a bus where two people are talking to each other. And so difference comes down to how you address the ions within that configuration and how the crosstalk could interfere or not. So our approach is really about that movement of the ions rather than having them sit in one stationary spot.
Yeah, that's really easy to visualize, actually. Yeah, thanks for that explanation. So you have currently two machines now, right? Basically H0 and H1. how can people access these today? We were talking about killer apps before. So I know that they are accessible on Microsoft Azure Quantum. Is there another way too?
Yeah. So we handle customers directly. That's one path is just coming to us directly. And with H0, it's a credit-based system. So you essentially buy your gift card of credits, and then you draw down from that. When you run a circuit, it uses a certain amount of credits depending on how complex it is. So it's analogous to the amount of time spent on the system. So if you're doing something really simple, it's fewer credits. If you're doing something really complex, it's going to take longer for the system to do, cost more credits. And then with the H1 system, we do it as a subscription model where users get a certain amount of access throughout the month. And that's really driven by what customers have told us in terms of if you're really developing algorithms, you're not necessarily just doing a 5-minute experiment. Like, okay, good, I got some results. You're repeatedly running things, and some of these algorithms can take tens of hours or longer to run to really get those results. So we're trying to accommodate the different needs among the users. So yes, as you mentioned, Microsoft is another path. So we're part of the Microsoft Azure Quantum solution. And so customers who like to use the Microsoft's Q-Sharp platform and have an easy way to access our system, perhaps they have an Azure account already, that's a possibility for customers, and it's quite convenient. And then we also have a number of ecosystem partners who have their own software platforms, and by working with them, customers can have access that way as well.
Yeah, because some of the solutions won't be pure quantum. It'll be like mixing classical and quantum, like in that hybrid approach. So I guess for some people, they will want to have like a cloud environment where they can write the more traditional code too, and then reach out for that quantum piece. With your subscription model for the H1, is that then just like a flat for the month? Or do like costs go up if you end up running, like, as you said, like many hours worth of?
It's a fixed amount of access over the course of the month. Okay. That's guaranteed, and we try to have queued access that some amount of reserved access, so you can have the machine to yourself for certain algorithms. That makes a huge difference. So you're not constantly heading back into the queue. Some algorithms, you just want to do a quick thing and then make a change classically and then go back in and do another quantum operation, and that kind of back and forth. If you have to wait in line every single time, you can imagine like at the DMV where hey, you didn't fill out line 3, you need to go fill that out and come back. Like, I don't want to have to get back in line. So we do have reserved times, and that allows for kind of, when you need it, you can have that dedicated access to the system. And at other times, queuing works fine. You can set it, forget it, come back, get your results later.
One day it'll make your head hurt because a quantum computer will be used to optimize how you're queued up to use a quantum computer. It might be possible.
That's often been talked about. You need a quantum computer to build a quantum computer. Yeah.
And do you have any kind of like estimator for like depth of circuit and how much it would cost? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, we have something called a syntax validator, which is not quite a simulator, but it does allow users to try their circuit in a sense. So make sure their code is right. So they can run it through. It goes through all the same software stack that you would in the normal usage case. And the only piece it doesn't do is actually run on the quantum hardware. It does everything else. And it'll return the data in the right format. And it'll just be filled with all zeros. And that allows users to make sure that they didn't have bugs in kind of getting their code written and interfaced appropriately. And that's just a tool that's provided free just to make sure you're on track. And as part of that, it'll also give an indication of what the cost of that particular circuit would be. So the cost is a formula. So you could also do it on paper. It's essentially a function of how many single qubit gates, 2 qubit gates, measurements, and shots you're doing. So pretty straightforward to figure out. If you just have it written on paper and you look with your circuit, you could count it up. But a nice, easy way is just stick it in and see what the cost is going to be.
Yeah, because every once in a while when we're doing a POC and we use one of the like cloud access routes to get to one of these machines, we have that moment of hesitation. It's like, did we calculate it right? Or is this going to cost like 10 times as much as we thought?
Yeah, exactly. So we try to avoid that. Nobody wants that kind of stress. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it was going to be $20. Oh, $2,000. Oh, yeah, okay, that's a slight error that we made there. Yeah. So now we have these two machines, and I guess we can probably guess what the name of the next one will be if we went from H0 to H1, unless you guys have a new naming scheme coming. But can you talk a little bit about the roadmap coming up and maybe the quantum volume you're expecting to hit?
Yeah, so I'd say those go separately, actually. So we will keep increasing our quantum volume based on the H1 system. So H1 is a little bit more of an offering rather than a system. There will be more than one physical system serving up that capability. And it's really about when we launched our system, it's not fully populated in terms of the maximum number of qubits that can be in there. And so the trap can handle on the order of 40 qubits, that the one that's in H1. And over time, we'll be adding qubits to that system. So it'll go from 10 and to 12 to 20 or some numbers like that over time. And with that, we will also be pushing on fidelity. So you'll see more qubits, more fidelity from that H1 offering. H2, as you guessed at the naming convention, we will be launching next year, and it will add to that kind of where the cap is on qubit count. And so again, we'll be pushing on qubit number and qubit fidelity, gate fidelity. And really that's what drives what goes into making a good quantum volume measurement. So you have to have both number of qubits and the high fidelity. And it turns out that fidelity starts to matter even more than number of qubits to get the number quite high. So, and of course, our qubits are fully connected, which is one of those factors in the quantum volume calculation. But the quantum volume is more than a calculation. It's actually a measurement thing. And so that's something that we think is very important for everyone who's quoting numbers to provide the data that's measurement. It's a test you must pass, essentially. And so we'll keep testing our system, and we'll keep pushing those numbers up. And are still planning to keep on to what we claimed last year, which is an order of magnitude every year. So when we claimed that, we were at a quantum volume of 64 in June of last year. So we're aiming that by June of this year that we will have exceeded that 640 number, and then a year after that, 6,400, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's terrific. I was really impressed to see the 512 announcement a while back, onto that achievement. And I mean, this is an interesting technology, right? With Transmon or whatever, it's however many qubits the chip is set up for. In this case, it's almost like having a car engine that you could keep adding cylinders to. It's kind of a neat idea,
Yeah, I hadn't heard that analogy before, but I think that's accurate. Yeah, we're adding capability. Another analogy is we built an auditorium, and now we're filling it. It's plenty of room to grow as it is.
And you guys plan on continuing to use quantum volume as a measurement? Because like IonQ, they created their algorithmic qubits. So I didn't know if you had any plans to come up with something different, or you guys are happy with that general approach?
Yeah, so we're definitely aligned with what quantum volume tries to do, which is to provide a single number reference to what is the capability of this system. And it does a good job. Quantum volume does a good job of characterizing that. It's not only considering how many qubits, it prevents this sort of race to, I have more qubits. Well, if the qubits aren't quality, they don't really count. And actually, that's kind of the same thing that IonQ is saying with the algorithmic qubits. It's got to be quality. So we think that it's a pretty good measurement. It's not perfect, though. I think there are things which people provide or have proposed different kinds of benchmarks. Like, well, we think it should be an algorithm that you run, and then you see how good it ran, how well it ran on each of these different systems. Perhaps. So we have been contemplating something more along the lines of a quantum decathlon, where you have different tests that you run. I think there's many analogies to classical computing. You're running certain tests to see how good different pieces of the system are. How fast does it run? How much electricity does it use? And how does it run on this kind of test? And what about on a daily office environment? Or what if you're gaming or whatever? There's different metrics. We think that there's room for that in quantum computing too. So it's our goal to be as open and honest with our data about how it performs, and we're thinking about other ways to measure quantum computers and benchmark them, and we think quantum volume is definitely a piece of that, but it's not the end all be all. There will be more.
So with this constant growth, a lot of companies in their roadmaps seem to be indicating that 2023 into 2024 is going to be this pretty magic 12-month period. IBM's claiming Condor, 1120 qubits or so around then. IonQ is thinking that by 2024, with the help of interconnect too, that they'll be achieving similar numbers. When do you anticipate something like quantum advantage happening?
I think it's yet to be seen. I think we see this period as being very important from a slightly different perspective, which is now is the time when we can check our work. We can run simulations at this stage on a laptop, and it won't be long before we need HPC and supercomputers to do it. But there's this period where we can gain confidence that quantum's doing what it's supposed to. We can say, here's what the real result is. Here's how the quantum computer is performing. And it won't be too long before we surpass the capability of simulation. So somewhere in the 40 to 50 qubit range probably is where we cross into that threshold where you will have wanted to already build the confidence that the quantum computer is doing the right thing. So will that be quantum advantage? It's yet to be seen, but that would be the first time frame when we think that might start to appear. And really, there's a dynamic going on where we're racing to build the best hardware, the most capable hardware, and so forth, to kind of push forward that time. How soon can we get that date? And at the same time, the algorithm writers are using their creativity to kind of pull that end date in. So some of the early estimates of some of these algorithms, they said, okay, well, you've got to have hundreds of millions of qubits to get there. And then they'll come back a year later, oh, hey, new breakthrough. We've taken orders of magnitude out of what our resource estimations are. So they're kind of pulling that in from those future dates. And I think there are certain smaller applications where people are thinking about how can we leverage the power of quantum. So I think in my own personal opinion, we're going to be surprised that some innovative people will leverage the tools that we're providing to kind of pull that quantum advantage to be sooner than people think.
Yeah, I feel that way too. And I love that idea of a surprise because this industry has had so very many of them already. In fact, I'm talking to someone from one of them in a way, but we keep getting these pleasant surprises. And I do think that it'll be a combination of just a little more hardware and a little better work on the stack. And ta-da, you've got something you can't do with classical. And
I think we're seeing a lot more people and organizations jumping into quantum. They're starting to recognize the potential advantages. And the more that there's participation in this industry, there's more thought behind it. That mind share is going to lead to some major breakthroughs. That's what I'm hoping for. And I'm hoping to be surprised by kind of some of these applications that emerge.
Yeah. And on that note, as we wait for one of these use cases that will show advantage, what kind of use cases are you seeing now, as customers prepare for that big quantum lift and shift that's going to happen eventually? Do you have any visibility to what people are working on? The major categories of problems that people are tackling are in the optimization space, the acceleration of machine learning, and chemical molecular simulation. So it's in those three categories that people from a variety of industries are starting to see how it can apply to their business. And interestingly, there's crossover. Like a pharmaceutical company, you'd say, oh, okay, well, they're just going to use it for molecular simulation, do some drug development. But they're actually also looking at quantum from the point of view of how can I improve my drug distribution or my supply chain around it. An automotive company would say, well, yes, I'm interested in the transportation logistics, but also how can I build a better battery for electric vehicles? So I think there's a lot of crossover amongst those three concepts, but those are the kinds of problems that people are tackling. And really the involvement right now is to formulate some of those basics to get proof of concept that yes, quantum can provide a path on these certain kinds of industry algorithms, that the problems that they care about. And right now the problems are small. They're scaled down to the point that
With a pen and paper, you could probably figure them out, what the optimal solutions are. But it won't be long before that, because of that exponential type of problem, that it becomes really impossible, even with classical computers, to be able to solve. And so it's really about getting in, learning, participating, understanding how to use systems, and starting to apply them. And as the hardware scales up and as these algorithms get more innovative, there'll be a path to hopefully in the near term, providing that business value where we go to, yes, we are talking about how many percent savings is this going to be off supply chain or off of current processes.
And when this finally happens, that it actually does make sense to run it on a quantum machine, do you anticipate a bottleneck in access to your systems? Or do you think that with this little leeway of a couple of years, that you'll have enough live online that should be able to meet the initial demand?
So there's a little bit of a trade-off, and we're trying to make sure that we can balance the trade-offs. One is, do you put your efforts into scaling up the capabilities we have now, or do you put your efforts into putting that next generation system out? So it's definitely a balance. It's not a either or. It's how do we best get that right mix of enough capacity at this capability versus providing that next system. And we think right now the emphasis is leaning more towards getting that next generation system and the one after that and so forth, really because we want to reach that point of value as soon as possible. But yes, as more players come in, we're looking at expanding that capacity as well. So trying to walk a fine line.
That sounds great. And it'll be really exciting to see you guys hit the next few markers too on that orders of magnitude roadmap.
Well, we certainly hope so, and hope we can bring that news out and put the results on our page and show that we are measuring these things and that we're advancing as we thought we would. Yeah.
I've been tweeting about it all along, and you haven't disappointed yet. So I hope that continues to be the case.
Indeed.
All right. So, I really enjoyed this chat. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity.
And I don't know if there's anything you wanted to plug before we close. And of course, there'll be show notes too, where I'll be putting info.
I would say that if there are companies that are interested in talking about their journey through quantum, we'd be happy to engage. And our email is quantumsolutions@honeywell.com, and we'd encourage conversation about it.
Awesome. Thanks again, Justin.
Thanks very much.
That does it for this episode. Thanks to Justin Ging for joining today to discuss Honeywell Quantum Solutions. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to Protivity's The Post-Quantum World and maybe leave a review to help others find us. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Constant Hacker. That's Constant with a K, Hacker. You'll find links there to what we're doing in quantum computing services at Protivity. You can also find information on our quantum services at www.protivity.com or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, be kind and stay quantum curious.